Okay, yeah, my name is Cory Brown, Falcha. I usually start with some Scottish Gaelic because I'm learning it. Nobody else speaks it, so I have to use it on you guys. Falcha, my name is Misha Cory. I am Cory Brown. I write sometimes at 365jsthings.tech. You can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn over there. I work at a place, but apparently I need permission to tell you that, so just know that. I've been doing JavaScript and front end generally and other things for about 15 years or so. This is my first year in Theater 13. And this is the first year in the last couple years where I have not gone head-to-head with conceit odds. And I thought this year, I'm finally not going to have to go compete in a different room while Kent's over giving the amazing presentation I'm getting the leftovers. And then I sat through Kent's and I'm like, maybe I would have preferred that so I'm not compared directly to him. But we'll see how this goes. So I want to start by kind of laying some groundwork. Why am I even giving this talk at all? I think it's because I think we are in a code calamity. Maybe that's a bit of an overstatement, but in a position here in the way that we've been writing code for the last many years. And I don't think AI is going to help us. And the reason I don't think AI is going to help us is because AI only uses stuff that we've told it about, and we've done this to ourselves. We've trained it on some interesting data. So what I hope you kind of get out of this in the end is that we need to be expecting more out of our colleagues, and we need to be demanding more of ourselves, and I personally need to do better at preparing in tech setup. We need to teach more, we need to question more, share more, think more, experiment more, learn more, and imagine more. And I hope at the end of this talk, I've kind of conveyed that idea to you in this. But to get to the point, I'm going to be talking about readability and some things related to readability. And let's start with the obligatory definition. Readability is the degree to which something is readable, right? Which is a super useful definition. Let's try to expand on that. Let's find out what readable means. It's the ability to be read. And as everyone knows, read is just the past tense of read. So, however, to read is the act of comprehending written information. So if we were wiser at the beginning of this, we might have started with a better definition. The act, here we go. Readability, have we caught up? Readability is the degree to which some written information is able to be comprehended, and comprehended is the important part here, I think. In The Art of Readable Code, which is a great book, little dated, but still really good, the authors propose a fundamental theorem of readability that says code should be written to minimize the time it should take for someone else to understand it. I think that's a pretty halfway decent definition of what we mean when we say readable code, right? This is kind of the idea that we're trying to convey. But the question that to me that's obvious from this fundamental theorem is which someone, right? So let's use an analogy. Instead of code, let's just talk about regular prose. When newspaper authors and journalists write for a newspaper, they typically aim for an 11th grade reading level. But why 11th grade? Why not 5th or 3rd? Or, if you want to maximize your audience, maybe a kindergarten read level. See Harry, run kind of level stuff. We get more people reading. I think the reason we aim for the 11th grade is aimed for is because news often contains complex information. All right? So there needs to be a certain level of sophistication, of understanding of complex ideas and thoughts in order to convey what needs to be done or what needs to be understood. And at a 5th grade or a 3rd grade or a kindergarten reading level, you're just not going to be able to convey that kind of nuance, that kind of complexity. At the same time, you do want to maximize for the broadest possible audience. So 11th grade seems like kind of the sweet spot for hitting both of those things. But how do you even know what a reading level is or what reading level someone is at? Fortunately, we have standardized tests. We know what an 11th grade reading level is. It's very clear. And not only that, we know what your reading level is, or you can know what it is, or your teachers. And you can say, I have an 11th grade, I have a 12th grade, I have a college level, whatever, reading level, I have a 8th grade reading level, whatever the case it is. We do that. We know that because of standardized testing like the ACT, which used to stand for, I learned this, American College Testing. Does that mean that it's the American College Testing test? I guess so. I don't know. But it doesn't matter. We have that. What we don't have is something like an American Code Testing test that lets us know our reading level comprehension when we're reading code. Nothing like that exists. Nor am I proposing that we create one, because that's just way out of my league, but I'm saying we just don't have one, right? We have no way of understanding how well are you, what's your reading comprehension level when it comes to reading code? So, I want to do an experiment. Who can read this? And remember, reading means comprehension. It does not say math. Everyone, my kid said that too. Math is not a word that's in there. No hands, I noticed. This is exactly what I expected. I can read this. It says, Hamiandokas gumbi lama live. You have to trust me on that. I'll explain what that means in a minute. But this is pretty easy for me to read. Do we have any Spanish speakers in the house here? Who can read this? Shout it out. What's it say? And then tell me what it means. And it means? What do you enjoy from my presentation? Yeah, I hope you enjoy my presentation. Yeah. French speakers? No French speakers? Maybe a little bit? Oui? What's it mean?
And that you appreciate my presentation.
Yes, perfect. Chinese speakers? Can you read that? I hope so. My children wrote that. They're in the Chinese immersion. I hope they got it right. All right, good. It's who has no idea what this, like, even where to begin with this, right? Exactly. Now let me ask you a question. Is this readable? It's kind of readable. I imagine there's approximately 1 billion people in the world that argue that they can read this, that this is readable. French speakers, I hope, argue, if my translation is okay, that this is readable. Some people read this is readable enough. I can assure you that this is readable. And yet, most of you can't read any of this, right? So there seems to be some distinction between what is readable and what you can read. Briefly, let's talk about what code readability is not. Code readability is not the ability to read code aloud and have it sound something like English. That's not what code readability is. It's because JavaScript is, in fact, not English. There we go. A little delayed there. It turns out languages have grammar, and programming languages are no different. So let's go back to this one before, Hamiandokas gumbi lama live. If I were to transliterate this, take it one beat at a time, one word at a time, this would translate to, am I the hope that will be a good day to you? Which makes 0 sense at all. That's because that's not what that says, right? The words you have there and what it means are disassociated somewhat when you try to push it directly through another language. What this says, what Hamiandokas gumbi lama live means is, I hope that you have a good day. If I were to present am I the hope that will be a good day at you, as a sentence towards you, you'd be like, what are you on? Please learn to speak better. So programming languages have grammar, much like spoken languages have grammar. And that grammar is not English. It's not English grammar. So when we talk about readability, what we're often doing is in the context of talking about unreadability, usually like in the case of a PR, where you're talking to your junior developer on your team, and you're like, hey, we need to refactor this code. It's not readable. And when we do that, it's unreadable code. It's kind of like the way that the Supreme Court once defined obscenity. And that is, I know it when I see it. Which, much like a definition for obscenity, is not a good definition for readability either. So I want to do another experiment. We're going to do a few experiments here. Which is more readable to you? That? 1? Or 2? Or if you're really feeling fisky, 3? Right? And you don't have to answer, just think about it. what's more readable to you, and think about why. Why is that more readable, the one you chose, more readable to you? How about another one? More readable 1 or 2? It's like an eye exam. And think about why. The important thing is, why is this more readable to you than the other one? One last one, maybe one last one. While you're looking at this one, thinking which one of these is more readable to you, I have an anecdote to share about this. As I said, I've been been doing JavaScript for about 15 years, and when this fat arrow syntax first came out, I happened to be teaching night classes at like a boot camp, and I knew some people who were doing some things as well, and it was interesting at the time. There were a number of think pieces that came out by prominent JavaScript people, old and crusties, that were saying, hey, we should stay away from this fat arrow syntax. And the reason is that it's going to be very confusing for new engineers entering the field. And we want to optimize for readability for young engineers. Stick with the old and true one. This new one, it's too unreadable for them. Interestingly, because I taught brand new engineers and new people that did, I was able to ask them, hey guys, which do you prefer? And overwhelmingly, and this was true for everyone that I knew that also taught, new engineers prefer the fat arrow syntax. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that the old and crusties made an argument that we should favor the first one for the sake of our junior engineers, and the juniors themselves prefer the second one? Oh, you stole my word. Yes, we'll get to that. One quick spicy tangent, and I know Kent really likes. I might offend him with this, but I'm going to try not to. Which one's better, 1 or better 2? Let's see. Do I have? Yeah. Come on, there we go. Yeah. So my point is, aside from that last slide, we don't want to confuse readability with that word, familiarity. The two are very different things. And the reason that the old and crusties preferred the former one, and they just basically made up the thing. Oh, it's think of the children. And really, they were more familiar with the original one. These new engineers were taught that fat arrow syntax from the beginning. They were familiar with it. They preferred it. Familiarity. But why? Come on. There we go. Why should we not include the idea of familiarity as part of our metrics for readability? After all, when we are lack of familiarity with code slows us down. It's like a speed bump when we're reading through code, right? The patterns that are new to us cause us to stop and to think and to verify in our minds, like, what is actually going on here? I'm not sure. Does this do what the author claims think it does? I don't have the experience with it. I'm not so sure. It's a little sus. And of course, these are really great points that I'm making, right? So let's assume for a minute that we should take familiarity into account when we are considering readability, when we are considering to optimizing code for reading, right? We should be minimizing familiarity, or maximizing familiarity, excuse me. The next question then is, of course, familiar to whom? Because if we don't know who we're trying to optimize for, how can we possibly optimize for it? Is it junior developers? Well, as we said, we could fool ourselves into thinking that it is, as others have. Is it senior developers? Maybe we want to lean on people who have the most experience. Maybe we meet somewhere in the middle. Is there our mid-levels? Are we just concerned about the people on our team, or maybe at our company? Maybe the entire industry. Is it back-end developers we're concerned with, or front-end developers? Maybe for some reason we're concerned about whether Java developers can read our code. The idea of who it is that we are targeting for our familiarity is an important question. If we haven't answered that, then what exactly is the point of us trying to, familiar to whom, in what context? Another experiment. This is some Egyptian hieroglyphs. It has a meaning, an actual meaning. I assume none of you read Egyptian, so hopefully this will turn out all right. Just as a guess, though, because I assume you don't know, would you wager that this symbol has a positive or negative connotation? By raise of hands. Positive? Okay. And negative? All right, slightly more on the positive. Okay. How about this one? Positive. Hands raised. Okay. Yeah, and negative. Okay, some of you didn't vote on that second one. That's all right. I don't know. Maybe we have a replication crisis on our hands here. We'll find out. So this particular symbol means to be free from, which I would argue, or I think most people would argue, is a very positive connotation, whereas this one means will be without, which generally I would say is a negative connotation. So what does that mean? Well, in an experiment, they exposed two groups of people to Chinese characters. I used Egyptian hieroglyphs because I was afraid people knew Chinese. For a short time, participants were told that these symbols represented adjectives and were asked to rate whether the symbol had positive or negative connotation. The symbols the participants had previously seen were consistently rated more positively than those they had not. In a similar experiment, they were asked at the end of it not what the connotations had, but how they felt after the experiment. The ones who were exposed to ones they had already been exposed to generally described themselves as feeling more happy, more positive than those without. This is because of a phenomenon called familiarity bias. You probably have heard of this. It's a phenomenon in which people tend to prefer the familiar options over unfamiliar ones, even when the unfamiliar options are better, objectively. So when an otherwise neutral thing is familiar to us, we tend to associate positively to it, even when our familiarity is unconscious. I don't know if you noticed, it's not there in this one, but you probably did. Maybe it's very faint. I never looked. The negative symbol is over in the left-hand corner, so I tried to subconsciously get in there and see if you guys felt more exposed to it. I don't even know if it's visible on the screen. But anyway, when an otherwise neutral thing that we are unfamiliar to, it tends to have associated negatively too. We do. So the more we are exposed to a thing, the more at ease and happy and good we feel about it, almost regardless of the actual utility of it. Something rather profound, though, happens to us, I think, when we recognize that, and this is a thing that happens to all of us. We all have familiarity bias all the time. It is just there. It's human. And when we recognize that, I think something profound happens to us. We tend to go from perceiving ourselves kind of as the teacher we know to the student, one willing to learn. Whereas before, we might have started a review of some code, perhaps, by saying, this code's not readable, it needs to be refactored. Instead, we might offer and say, we might think this code's unfamiliar to me, which might lead us to question, well, why do you, the author, think that this is better? Not in an accusatory way, but more like, I'm curious. Why was this one gone with rather than the other one? There's a quote that's often attributed to Albert Einstein. There's a debate as to whether or not he had anything to do with this, but if you can't explain it simply, you probably don't understand it. And I think this is a good counterbalance to the problem of familiarity bias. You definitely have a gut reaction, but can you explain that gut reaction as to why you have it? Why is this thing more readable than that thing is an important question we should be asking if we're going to ever reach for that readability word. Or is it just simply more familiar to you? Measurability is a key anecdote for this. If you want, the fact is, if you want to enforce something, you need to be able to detect it. If we're going to make something a measure to hold to, it seems logical that it should be measurable. And I think if you think something is bad, it's on you to prove it. Does that mean that we need to scrutinize every unfamiliar thing every time we come across it? No. That we have things to do. That's not going to work for us. It's not what I'm suggesting. What I am suggesting is having a bit of more of an open mind when it comes to the unfamiliar. If you are the reviewer or the reader, of a piece of code, whether in a peer review or just some old code that some person 5 years ago wrote that it's really easy to throw them under the bus. I do that all the time, so no judgment here. When you're reading it, you should practice being more open, practice asking more questions, suspend your judgment until you understand, and be prepared to embrace some experimentation. If you're the author of something that you suspect might be perhaps a little controversial, or you're introducing a new concept, a new pattern, whatever it may be ready to teach, but also be ready to be taught, because you will probably be wrong more often than you are right. Especially if you're more junior and the other person is more senior, typically they'll be able to kind of explain more. Not always, but sometimes. Be prepared to receive feedback gracefully, because while there are a lot of people in this room, not everyone who codes is in this room, and they didn't hear this wonderful talk by me giving them this advice. And so even leaders in your organization may come back and say, this is unreadable, change it, and you give them really good arguments as to why it's not unreadable, and perhaps they just have some unfamiliarity bias, and they say, what are you talking about? I said change it, and then you have to change it. And that's fine. Receive that gracefully. The other thing is, do try to isolate impact, because when you're introducing something unfamiliar, people are untrusting of it. That is natural. That is nature. Make them feel more at ease by saying, hey, I've limited it. It's only right here. And then we can try it out and see how that feels, and move forward with it if that works. The important thing to remember is you cannot accurately judge until you accurately understand. That is a hard thing to do, but keep that in mind. The questions you can ask yourself when assessing a new thing is after you've understood the grammar, after you've correctly understood, is, does this clarify or does it obscure? These are great kind of binaries to look at. Does it hide details or does it hide bugs? Can you scan this, or do you have to read the whole thing in order to understand it? Is it a complete encapsulation, or does it leak? And any of you who saw my talk last year might know what I'm talking about there. But I won't get into that. At this point, I was starting to feel like y'all might be thinking, oh, this poor soul, who hurt him? Why did he feel the need to have this conversation here at a conference and like go through the lot of work to put this thing together? It's a great question. I have some reasons that I could go into, and maybe I have some time. I was gonna save it, but I have some time. I went through this a little bit quicker than I thought. So should we buckle up? Time for some airing of some grievances? All right. Oh, I hope this goes well. This could get spicy. I apologize if it does. I'm with Richard Feldman when he asked in a pretty well-received talk, I think, why isn't functional programming the norm? I ask this question every time I run into something that isn't like there's clearly a better way. It is functional programming. I can demonstrate why it's better. It is not the norm. Why is it not the norm? What do people say? It's just too hard to read. That's why we don't do it. Oh, the answer, I think, though, is that it's a familiarity bias problem. The problem is our CS instructors in college, they were taught OOP. And so what do they teach? They teach OOP and procedural and stuff, but they don't teach functional, generally speaking. I didn't learn about functional programming until I was well into my career. All of my learning about it is self-taught. It is unfamiliar to most people, and there is a high bar to entry. It takes some time to understand what in the world is going on when you're looking at functional programming. Once you understand the grammar, it makes a lot of sense, and you can read it pretty well, really well, in fact. I'm with Eric Elliott. Now, this is a spicy one. This is a good one. I'm with Eric Elliott when he says nested ternary are great. He caveats. There's caveats in that post. I suggest you read that post. But I agree with him. Nested ternaries are great, and you are wrong to dismiss them out of hand. There, I said it. I can demonstrate for you after this. I can prove it with stuff later. I don't have time for it, but what do people say? Well, because obviously, guys, nested ternaries are hard to read. That's why we're all taught to avoid them. And it's just self-evident, right? Obviously, why is this idiot up here even suggesting that we should use nested ternaries? He's a fool. I can dismiss everything he said before. Well, maybe. I'm with the authors of the Art of Readable Code when they advocate for flexible white space and line breaks and column alignment. Typo there. People say, just use prettier. I mean, okay. So to quickly recap on this, the things I would like for you all to take away from this. Readable code and familiar code are two very different things. Please make sure you are making a distinction when you're looking at things. Don't just pull out, this is unreadable. Readability is measurable. We don't currently have a way to measure code readability. Well, we do. That's not true. I lied. We do. We don't have a way for measuring an individual's code readable comprehension. How about that? And familiarity, though, is deeply contextual. Someone who has a high amount of code readable comprehension may not be familiar with something that is good. And they're like, I can't read this, it's unreadable. So remember, familiar to whom is the question. Come with that. When you're making a case for something, come with data. Be open to data. Assert less. Ask more questions. You cannot accurately judge until you accurately understand. If you want some further reading, I've mentioned this a few times, the Art of Readable Code is actually a great thing. It doesn't really touch on what I talked about. It doesn't talk about familiarity at all. This just has some really good ideas on how to make code actually more readable. Readable to whom, again, but there's some really good things that I think we could put into practice. It would mean augmenting or abandoning some things that are generally considered best practices, prettier. So it's something to consider. But Morantang, thank you very much. Again, I'm Cory Brown, JS Things with Tech. There's some stuff about me there, and I got like a couple minutes. Do we have any questions? I am 2 over. I have no time. We could talk in the hall.